What does it mean when the person who claims to love you most destroys the best thing you had, and does it in front of 40 people and you stand there and do nothing? I spent 8 months telling myself I was choosing freedom. But freedom does not show up to a birthday party and grab your husband by the collar. What showed up that night was not mine. And by the time I understood that, the bracelet was gone, the apartment was his, and I was standing in a law office lobby holding papers I had not been told to expect. My name is Naomi, and I am 34 years old. I design interiors for a living, freelance mostly, and I have always been the kind of person who walks into a room and shifts the conversation. That is not bragging. It is just what I do, the way some people cook well or tell good jokes. I married Derek when I was 28, and for a long time, our Sunday mornings were the best part of my week. We would lie in bed with the newspaper spread between us, trading sections without talking, our feet tangled under the covers. Nobody was performing anything for anyone. Derek is a logistics man, a planner. He shows love by building things. The year we got married, my mother Gloria gave him her handwritten recipe for jollof rice, and he practiced it 6 times before he got it right. He never told me that. He just started making it on the first of every month. On our first anniversary, he gave me a silver charm bracelet, and every year he added something new. A tiny house, a compass, a crescent moon, a paintbrush for my design work, a key. 5 charms for 5 years. I wore that bracelet every single day. But something shifted after his promotion in our 4th year. He started traveling 3 weeks a month, and I threw a dinner party for his birthday while he was gone. 12 people came, and every conversation was about Derek. Nobody asked me one question about my work. I cleaned the plates alone at midnight and thought, I am the wife of someone interesting. And that is my whole identity here. That Sunday, I pulled my feet away from his under the sheets before he was awake. He registered it as morning stiffness. I knew it was the beginning of something I could not name yet but could feel, like a door opening in a room I thought was sealed. I started wearing a new perfume. Derek stood in the bathroom doorway and watched me spray it, opened his mouth, closed it, said it was nice. I said thanks. That night, my phone sat face down on the nightstand for the first time, and when he glanced at it, I said the screen light bothered me. He asked if something between us felt different because it did to him and he wanted to understand before it got bigger. I told him nothing was different and he was imagining things. The next morning, he found a long, dark hair on the collar of my jacket, one that was not mine, held it between his fingers, and dropped it in the trash. 7 months before the birthday party that ended everything, I went to a gallery opening for a friend's photography exhibit. A man named Marcus Hale stood next to me in front of a photograph of a woman laughing alone on a rooftop. He did not say I was pretty or beautiful. He said I was the kind of person who changed the temperature of a room when I walked in. Temperature. Not looks, not charm, but impact. It was the word I had been waiting 6 years for someone to say, and Derek had never come close to it. I gave Marcus my number on a napkin from the catering table and told myself it was networking. I knew better. Marcus was a freelance photographer, 31 years old, with the kind of intensity that makes you forget to check whether it is aimed at you or at the idea of you. His apartment in Greenpoint was one room with a mattress on a platform, 3 cameras on a shelf, and a single plant by the window. The opposite of the brownstone, Derek spent 2 years renovating for us. Marcus photographed me constantly, said he was working on a series about women in natural light, and I let myself believe that being his subject was different from being his possession. He asked about my day in such detail, what I wore, who I talked to, which streets I walked, and I interpreted all of it as the kind of attention Derek never gave me. When I mentioned a male colleague once, Marcus asked if the man was attractive. I laughed and called him jealous. He said of course he was, that I was the kind of woman men orbit. I heard that as a compliment. It was inventory. He had 2 deadbolts on his door and he checked his phone every time I went to the bathroom. I did not think about what any of that meant. The Wednesday after I slept with Marcus for the first time, I told Tanya about him at our standing lunch at La Mer. I leaned across the table and made the whole thing sound like a movie. I said Derek and I had not really been together in a year, that we just shared an address. That was a lie. He had made the jollof rice 4 days earlier, and I had watched him dice the peppers with the same careful hands I fell in love with. But I was building a new story, one where the marriage was already over, and I was just the first person brave enough to acknowledge it. Tanya asked what about Derek, and something crossed my face for half a second, something underneath the performance. Then I covered it. I said he wanted a wife who reported her schedule like an employee, and Tanya squeezed my hand across the table and said she understood. She chose to believe my version because her own marriage was stable and airless, her husband kind and reliable and entirely predictable, and my chaos was the most interesting thing in her week. She was living through me because she was too careful to live through herself. She agreed to cover for me whenever I needed her to, and she did not call it what it was because naming it would have meant looking at her own reasons for wanting me to keep going. Derek tried talking to me that Saturday morning. I had come home at 1 in the morning from what I called a design industry mixer. He was sitting at the kitchen table fully dressed with a glass of water, unable to sleep. He said he noticed the green dress I left in, the one with the open back, the one I bought 2 months ago and never wore for him. He was not accusing me, he was just naming what he saw, the way an accountant reads numbers, flat and careful. Then he asked if something about us felt different lately, because it did to him, and he did not know how to fix something he could not name. He asked me to tell him one thing I needed that he was not giving me, just one thing, and promised he would try. He said he was not too proud to try, and that our Sunday mornings used to be the best part of his week, and he wanted to know what happened to them. I turned it into an accusation. I told him not everything I did was about him, that I went to a work event, wore a dress, came home, and here he was at 1 in the morning making me explain myself as if I had committed a crime. I said that was exactly the kind of thing that made me not want to come home, that his concern felt like surveillance and not love. Those words landed hard and I watched them hit. He nodded slowly, rinsed his glass and went to bed. I stood alone in the kitchen and felt two things at once, victory and something darker that I pushed away before I could name it. I followed the victory upstairs. The next week, Derek texted Tanya casually asking about a design awards event I had mentioned. There was no such event. Tanya covered for me and told him she thought it was on the 15th, then texted me immediately and said I needed to be more careful. I read her message and felt annoyed, not scared. I wanted the affair to feel like flying, and instead it was turning into scheduling. That same week, Derek opened the dresser drawer looking for a charger and found the charm bracelet coiled in the corner. He picked it up and counted the charms in his palm, 5 of them, 1 for each year, 5 years of accumulated proof that he had been paying attention. He put it back exactly where he found it and said nothing to me about it. But something changed in him after that, a quiet settling like a house shifting on its foundation. He did not confront me or ask anything new. He just seemed a little further away each morning, and I told myself the distance was his problem because he was the one who could not say what he felt. At a barbecue the following weekend, Ray Booker watched me from across the yard while I stood apart from the group, turned away, laughing quietly at something on my phone and shielding the screen with my hand. Ray knew that posture from his first marriage. He filed it away and said nothing to anyone. Not yet. I wanted the birthday dinner to be perfect. 40 guests at Lucia's Terrace, a rooftop restaurant with glass walls and a view of the whole city at night. Derek arranged the table, the flowers, the cake. White peonies because he remembered they were my favourite. The cake came from a bakery I had mentioned once, in passing, 3 months earlier, and he had tracked it down without telling me. When I walked in and saw the table, something pulled inside my chest, a softness I was not expecting and did not want. I translated it into guilt, then into irritation. I told myself he did these things so I would feel like I owed him. The dinner was warm and loud and alive, exactly the kind of room I am built for. I moved between tables, touching shoulders, laughing, performing the version of myself that needs 40 people watching to feel real. Derek sat with Ray and two friends near the bar. He watched me from across the room, steady and patient, making sure my glass stayed full even from a distance. I glanced at him once and thought, he is sitting. He is always just sitting. I did not understand that watching me shine while being content to sit was his way of loving me. I had been reading it as passivity for 2 years, and by the time I saw it differently, the reading had already cost me everything. Then Derek stood and gave a toast. He is not a public speaker, and everyone who knows him knows that. He cleared his throat twice and held his glass a little too tightly. He said I was the most extraordinary person he had ever met, and that he did not always know how to say it, and he knew I knew that about him. He said this year he wanted to try saying it here, in front of everyone, because maybe saying it in private had never been enough. He looked right at me when he said it, and for a moment the room was just the two of us and the distance between our end of the table and his. I looked at my plate. My eyes were wet, but not from gratitude. It was grief, because the words I had needed for years were arriving on a night I had already decided they were too late. He noticed the bracelet was gone from my wrist before he started the toast. He gave it anyway and sat down. People clapped. I did not look at him again for a long time after that. At 9:15, Marcus came through the service stairway. His eyes were red and his jacket was dark, and he had been drinking since 6. He knew about the venue because I said the name in a voice note the week before, handing him a map without knowing it. He crossed the terrace without looking at anyone except me, and then he changed direction and went straight for Derek by the bar. He grabbed Derek's collar with both hands and said, loud enough for the entire rooftop to go silent, that I was his, that I had been his for 7 months, and that Derek was sitting here playing husband while I came to him. Derek did not move for 2 full seconds. Then he reached up, removed Marcus's hands from his shirt, and stepped back. Marcus swung. Derek moved sideways and the punch caught nothing. 2 waiters and Ray pulled Marcus back. In the silence that followed, Marcus pointed at me and told me to say it, to tell them all what we were. I was standing by table 2 holding my copper Moscow Mule mug, and I had nothing. For the first time in my life, no performance came. The room was staring at me, and there was no version of myself ready for this particular silence. Every conversation I had ever controlled, every room I had ever walked into and rearranged with my presence, had not prepared me for a moment where the truth stood up and spoke in front of an audience I had handpicked. The ice in the mug had melted and the copper was cold against my palm, and I could not speak. Tanya found me in the coat check alcove behind the hostess stand, a narrow cold space lit by a single overhead bulb. She asked me what I had done. My first response was anger, and then the anger collapsed, and underneath it was something younger and rawer. Not fear of consequences, but the terror of being seen without a mask. I told Tanya that Marcus was not supposed to come. She said that was not the point. I looked at the floor and said nothing else. Then, within 90 seconds, I pulled myself back together. By the time I stepped out of that alcove, the performance was running again. Before Derek left the restaurant, he found me near the exit. His shirt was still wrinkled where Marcus had grabbed it, and the collar was stretched on one side. He stood 3 feet away and spoke so quietly I had to lean in to hear him over the wind coming through the open terrace doors. He asked why I needed an audience for this, why this could not have stayed between us if it was going to happen at all. He pointed at the stretched collar and said that a stranger grabbed him in front of 40 people he has to see at holidays and school events and neighborhood dinners, and he wanted to understand what I believed this accomplished. He asked me if there was anything left between us worth protecting, because he was willing to hear the answer either way, but he could not keep guessing. I told him he was making a scene, that people were already staring, and that we should go home and talk about it later. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Okay." But the way he said it was different from every other time he said, "Okay." There was no softness in it, no waiting. He turned and walked toward the elevator alone, and he did not look back. Derek took the elevator to the ground floor and called Janelle. He told her something happened at the dinner and he needed to think. She did not push. He walked 4 blocks to the brownstone and sat in the dark living room under the crown molding he had restored himself, in the house he built for a marriage that was no longer inside it. By morning the story had been told 12 times. Ray's wife texted 2 friends. A guest posted a vague comment online about birthday parties with unexpected additions to the guest list. Derek's phone had 14 missed calls and he answered none of them. He texted Janelle 1 line asking for the name of someone who handles family situations, someone organized. She sent back a name and a phone number and nothing else. 5 days after the party, I sat Derek down in the living room and gave him a controlled version of the truth. This was my micro shift, my tactical adjustment. Instead of defiance, I switched to performed remorse. I said Marcus was someone I talked to at events, that it became emotional but not physical, that I was lonely and should have come to Derek first. I took responsibility in a way that sounded like accountability but functioned as careful editing. I did not say 7 months. I said a couple of months. I made it sound like fog I wandered into, not a house I built with both hands. Derek watched my hands the whole time, especially the left one gripping the arm of the couch, the hand that used to wear the bracelet. He asked how long. I said a couple of months. He said okay. I took his okay as acceptance. It was not acceptance. He already knew from Tanya it was 7 months, and he let the lie sit between us so he could measure exactly how far I was willing to go with it. He tried talking to me once more that same evening. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and said he had a specific question about the night of the party. He asked why I mentioned the venue name in a voice note, why I gave Marcus the map to find the dinner, because that detail changed what the evening looked like. He held the salt shaker in his hand, turning it slowly, and he asked if I understood that the party was something he built for me. The peonies, the cake from the bakery I mentioned once, the toast he was afraid to give but gave anyway, and whether any of that meant something I could name. I told him he was weaponizing his own kindness, using the things he did for me as leverage in an argument, and that it proved my whole point about the marriage, that his love always came with a receipt. He put the salt shaker down carefully and did not say another word for the rest of the night. The controlled confession failed completely, not because Derek said anything, but because the truth has its own schedule. The next morning I recorded a voice note for Marcus while driving. He had been calling 12 times a day since the party, demanding to know why I had not left Derek. I recorded a message to calm him down, saying I needed time, that Derek was suspicious, that he did not fight, he just sat there. And sometimes I wanted to scream. I called Derek a mocking nickname, Mr. Furniture, because of his stillness, the same quality I once loved about him. I sent the note to the family group chat by accident. I realized within 8 seconds and deleted it, but Janelle had her notifications set to auto-download audio. The voice note was already on her phone. 3 days later, Janelle sent it to Derek with 1 line, that he deserved to hear the truth from me, and that I would never give it to him. He sat at his desk that night with earbuds in and listened to my voice using a tone he had not heard in over a year, warm and intimate and impatient. He heard Mr. Furniture. He sat still for 4 minutes. Then he opened the small notebook he had been carrying and wrote down 3 dates, 2 locations, and the phone number Janelle gave him after the party. Janelle came to the brownstone that Tuesday. She sat across from me and asked 1 question. Whether I actually wanted to be married to her brother, or whether I wanted to be free and keep the house. I tried 3 answers, and none of them came out clean. Finally, I said I wanted to want to be married to him. She said that was the most honest thing I had said in 7 months, and at the door she told me she would not watch someone use her brother's patience as a ladder to climb out of consequences. I drove upstate to see my mother. The garden was still there, the tomatoes my father planted years ago still coming back every spring as volunteer seedlings, self-sustaining and indifferent to whether anyone tended them. Gloria made tea. I told her what happened. She listened without expression, the way she listens to everything, as if she decided long ago that reaction is a luxury she cannot afford. When I finished, she said something that closed my throat. She said when my father left, she was standing in the doorway, and I was behind her. And she knew I saw her beg, because I never looked at her the same way after. She said the mistake was not the begging. The mistake was letting me believe that devotion was the reason he left. He left because he was a coward, not because she loved too much. She told me I was running from the wrong thing. I drove home in silence and did not let myself think about what she said because it would have meant tearing up every story I told myself since I was 12. That same week I came home early and found Derek sitting at the kitchen table with the charm bracelet in front of him, just looking at it. His eyes were wet, and he did not wipe them when I walked in. He told me he kept thinking about the moon charm, that he gave it to me because I once said I liked how the moon does not need to be full to be beautiful. Then he stopped. He picked up the bracelet, put it in his pocket, and left the room. I stood in the doorway and told myself it was manipulation, sentimentality as strategy. I did not understand that I had just witnessed the last unguarded moment Derek would ever give me. The next morning he moved his wedding ring from his left hand to his right. I saw it at breakfast and told him it was on the wrong hand. He said he knew. That was his silent decision marker, the moment he stopped trying to repair and started preparing. I ate my toast and left for a meeting without understanding what it meant. That night he asked if I would come to a mediation appointment. He called it couples counseling. He said he wanted to try to fix things and asked if I would come. I agreed, partly because refusing would look like guilt, partly because I believed I could manage a structured conversation. I did not know the address he gave me belonged to the family law firm Janelle recommended weeks earlier. I went to Marcus's apartment to end the affair, not because I thought it was wrong, but because it had become unmanageable. Marcus was no longer the escape. He was a second cage. I wore the green dress, the same one Derek noticed months ago, and I did not ask myself why. Marcus opened the door and already knew why I was there. He said I was going back to Derek, and I told him I was going back to my life. He said he was my life. The softness in his voice was gone, and in its place was something corroded and tight. He paced across the small apartment and said he would call Derek, send the photographs, all 43 photographs he had taken of me in that room. Then he grabbed my wrist, the wrist where the bracelet used to sit, and pulled me toward him. I pushed back. He held tighter, and the skin burned under his grip, and in that second I saw what I had spent 7 months refusing to see. Marcus held me the way I always feared Derek would, like something he owned rather than someone he chose. The affair was supposed to be freedom, and it had walked me into the exact thing I was running from. I did not stay with that thought. I bargained instead. This was my voluntary line cross, the thing I did that could not be undone. I told Marcus about our joint savings, the equity in the brownstone, the details of Derek's retirement account, trying to calm him down by implying I would leave Derek and bring money. I did not mean it. I was buying my way out of the room with information that was not mine to trade. A neighbor through the thin wall heard the argument. I left 20 minutes later with a red mark on my wrist that I covered with a long sleeve. The next evening, Marcus followed me to a parking garage on Atlantic Avenue. He appeared between the concrete pillars on level 3 while I was carrying takeout. He told me I did not get to decide when this ended, and he blocked my car door. The ceiling was low, the exhaust hung in the air, and every sound bounced. I looked at him clearly, maybe for the first time, not the artist from the gallery, not the man who called me magnetic, just a person standing between a woman and her car using his body as a lock. I told him it was real, and it was done. He stepped aside. My hands shook the entire drive home. I called no one because I would rather have been in danger alone than admit I needed the man I already decided could not help me. 2 days later, Derek sat on the edge of the bed I had not slept in for 6 nights. He said he saw the mark on my wrist, and needed to know if I was safe. Then he said he was going to ask one question, and he already knew the answer. And he was asking because he wanted to hear whether I would tell the truth. He asked if the relationship with Marcus was physical. He used the name for the first time. He said if I lied now, not about the affair since he already knew about the affair, but if I lied about what it was, then he would know that honesty was not something I was prepared to offer. He said if I told the truth, all of it, he would stay in that room and listen without raising his voice. He told me he was offering the thing he should have offered 2 years ago: his full attention, his full presence, and the willingness to hear something that would hurt. I cried. I told him he wanted to interrogate me as if I were on trial, that he never once asked me what I needed, that he built things around me and expected gratitude. I said our marriage was a beautiful cage he constructed with his own hands, and never once asked me if I wanted to live in it. Parts of this were true. He did build without asking. The marriage did lack the verbal dimension I needed. But my protest, the affair, the lies, the financial details handed to Marcus, the voice note calling him Mr. Furniture, none of that was liberation. It was arson, and the fire was consuming the only person who had just offered to sit with me in the room. Derek did not interrupt. When I finished, he said he heard me, he believed that was how I experienced things, and he was sorry for the things he did not say. Then he paused and said that I did not ask him for words, that I left and found someone else's, and now he had to protect himself. He stood up and said he would handle this properly. The front door closed, his car started, and I sat on the bed waiting for him to come back. He did not come back. That week the gap between us became visible to everyone. I was loud, calling friends who did not answer, texting Tanya who did not respond, trying to build a version of the story that somebody, anybody, would accept. Derek was the opposite. He had been going to a boxing gym in a basement on Flatbush every morning at 5 since the week after the party. The trainer, a man named Cal, told him after 3 weeks that whatever it was, he was hitting it clean. And that was good, because people who hit messy are still angry, but Derek was past that. Derek did not respond, just unwound the wraps and showered and went to work. He was not angry. He was clarified. Anger requires the hope that the other person might change, and Derek no longer carried that hope. What he had instead was a list in the notebook, a timeline, and a meeting scheduled at the address on West Elm Street. I tried mentioning Marcus casually once at dinner, looking for a reaction, and Derek said he hoped Marcus treated me well. The flatness in that sentence was worse than any anger would have been, because anger requires hope, and he was past hoping. I tried to start a conversation about us, about what we could still save, and he answered politely, the way you talk to a neighbour you might not see again after moving day. The morning after the bedroom conversation, I found the bracelet on my nightstand, sitting on top of a folded note with nothing written on it, except the date of our first anniversary. I picked it up and tried to find what I used to feel when its weight was the best part of my day. The feeling was not there, not because the bracelet had changed, but because I had, and the woman I had become did not have the hands for what it required. I put it down. The mediation office was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner. No windows, a round table, 6 chairs. I arrived first and I was wearing the charm bracelet, a calculated gesture meant to say, recommitment. Derek came in 3 minutes later with a manila folder and did not look at my wrist. I gave my opening, talked about distance and loneliness. I was practiced, and I was smooth. Then Dr. Payne turned to Derek and he opened the folder. He placed documents on the table one by one. The voice note transcript, a timeline Tanya confirmed, bank records showing $14,000 in cash withdrawals, and texts Marcus sent Derek in a rage after I ended things, texts full of financial details Marcus could only have known because I gave them to him. Derek said he was filing for divorce. He said this meeting was to begin the process and that he wanted me present rather than receiving papers at a door. The petition included temporary financial orders, a freeze on joint accounts, exclusive possession of the brownstone, and a formal discovery request for all communications between me and Marcus. The hearing was in 3 weeks. I tried calling Ray's wife and she told me what Ray saw at the barbecue, the phone, the posture, and said my face at the birthday party was fear, not surprise. I tried Tanya and got voicemail. My cousin Kim said she loved me, but I called Derek Mr. Furniture in the family group chat, and that was his family too. I thought being desired by more than one man made me impossible to leave. I thought Derek's quiet patience was indifference, and Marcus's grip on my wrist was passion. What I understand now is that I was so afraid of becoming my mother in that doorway that I became something she never would have been. A woman who burned the house down with both hands and called it building something new. Closure snapshot? The Crown Heights sublet has thin walls and a radiator that clicks at night. Gloria calls every Sunday now and asks about Derek by name, every time, as if saying it enough could undo what I inherited. Kim texted that she is here when I am ready to be honest, not before. Marcus moved on to a gallery assistant within a week of me blocking his number. The charm bracelet sits on the windowsill where the morning light reaches it. I do not wear it, and I do not put it away. 5 charms, 5 years, and a key at the end that opens nothing now.